start to the new year, but we're here and we're healthy. And I'm actually speaking to you from Brighton, England. And my name is Leslie Gaston-Bird. And what am I now? I changed. I changed so many roles so many times, but I'm working with Carrie to do SoundGirls stuff in the UK, and I'm also a former AES governor at large, and I own my company Mixed Messiah Productions, and I'm a former professor at University of Colorado Denver, and I've done a handful of papers, maybe a dozen or so for AES conventions and conferences. And so we want to show you how you can submit a paper to an academic conference. It doesn't have to be AES. There's other conferences out there, IEEE, there's College Music Society, there's Immersa if you're into immersive audio. There's all sorts of different events happening. And if you're a researcher and you want to get your research out there and you're working on your postgraduate degree, or if you're a professional who wants to bring your knowledge and skills to a large group of people, this is the event for you. So I'm joined online right now by Bert Kraaijpoel, and he's joining me from, where are you, Bert?
I'm in The Hague in Holland,
Well,
the
it's nice
Netherlands.
to have you here. Yes, and
Thank you very much.
Bert is actually chairing the 150th AES convention, so he's going to be doing a little introduction and welcome. And we also have Jamie Angus, who is joining us from, where are you, Jamie?
I'm joining you from a canal boat in Manchester,
Oh, yeah, that sounds fun.
England.
So, and your picture is very stable. So your boat must not be rocking back and forth a lot.
My boat's not rocking much, and I'm pretty much next door to a cell tower.
Aha! So excellent Wi-Fi coverage there. And so Jamie's going to be doing the bulk of the presentation, which she in which she's going to guide us towards what to expect, what to do. And we are also joined by Colleen Harper. I'm going to see if I can ask Colleen to unmute herself so she can say a few words. And Colleen is the executive director of the Audio Engineering Society. We're so glad you could join us too, Colleen, just to welcome our friends from SoundGirls and to just tell us a little bit about what you do at the AES and what we can look forward to at AES 150. Want to say a few words?
Sure, thank you. So I am the executive director at AES. I've been here for almost exactly 2 years. I'm about 5 days away from 2 years. And we are so excited about the 150th. It'll be our third virtual convention. And we want to make sure that the submissions that we get are from all over the world, all different types of genres and experience. And we're really looking forward to encouraging submissions and participation from everywhere and everyone. So I really am grateful to Jamie, Bert, Leslie, the SoundGirls team for making this happen. And the AES staff is here if we can be of any assistance to our leaders, our convention leaders, or anyone who wants to submit something to the convention. So thank you so much for inviting me. And Leslie, I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's so good to hear from Colleen, our executive director for Audio Engineering Society. Carrie's in the background running the show, and I think if she wants to say a few words, she can hop on the chat button with me. But definitely thank you for Carrie, because she's wheeling and dealing right now. She's carrying this boat, this ship. It's not a canal boat. It's our virtual conference, and let's see. So I think when we were planning this, we decided we were going to start with Bert. And Bert Kraaijpoel is just going to give us an overview of the 150th convention. And then we're going to concentrate on Jamie's presentation. So Bert, can you go ahead and give us a little introduction? Because you're chairing the AES's 150th convention, which was scheduled to be in Amsterdam, but is now going to happen online. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm only half of the chairs because we do that between two of us. And that is very often the case that, the activities, the different events are done by a few people at a time. They share the responsibility. the same goes for the paper chairs. For instance, there are 2 paper chairs, but I think Jamie will talk about that a bit further. Yeah, we were supposed to have the conventions in Amsterdam. We hope that will be possible at any years in the future. And that is why there is quite some Dutch people in the team. But of course, there is from the headquarters, there is always basically the total technical support. Everything is done from headquarters. So it's a mixed organization. And in fact, we started planning a little bit before, but it's only just beginning. We just have the team more or less complete. And so this is the moment where we ask everyone who wants to contribute to any activity in the AES at this particular convention, of course, for me, that now is the moment to collect all the contributions. And this is specifically about papers, but it could be contributions for workshop as well, or tutorials and master classes and so on. So it's a bit wider area. Okay, that is one thing. My background is recording and gradually more and more teaching. And the past 20 years I'm only teaching. I'm teaching at the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague on sound and hearing. And I'm not a researcher, but I need the researchers very much. It's very important for me that other people are willing to share their knowledge so we can all use it. That is important for other researchers because we build all upon each other's shoulders, really. And for non-researchers like me, I couldn't do without. So I'm already a very long time, since my student time, a member of AES. And I could not have reached my career without AES. So I would encourage you, if you have something to share, please do. That's it for me now at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Definitely. Thank you. I love, the fact that you're asking people to share their knowledge. It sort of puts things in a different context if somebody's asking you to contribute to a body of knowledge as opposed to, academic research for research sake. Just like Bert says, we're a community, we're even a family. Some people feel AES is a family. And this audio world is fascinating, and we love to learn and we love to share, and we would love to see more women and more what we call minoritized people getting in here and presenting. The numbers are out there, the data is out there, that we need your voice. And so a lot of times when we go and we're soliciting and we're recruiting, papers for events, some of my women colleagues or Black friends of mine will say, I'd love to do something, but I don't even know where to start. Or they're intimidated by the process. And obviously not everyone is. There's a lot of gung-ho women that are out there and killing it, but, we need to make this process less scary, and more accessible. So, let me know in the chat box, how you feel about the process. We have some questions that we've received. And with all of that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, who's going to tell us how to do this. So Jamie, if you've got your presentation queued up, I'll mute my microphone. You can take it from here.
Okay, hello everyone. Just give me a while to share screen, and all being well, this will work just fine. There. Now, I've actually left a black space down the right hand side, so you can actually in standard view all being well see me, but also the chat box can go there. I'm one of the papers co-chairs, and I'm going to talk to you. Alright, it's how to submit a paper to an AES convention, but it's applicable to pretty much every professional society I've been to has a very similar process. Okay, so first things first. the first time I submitted a paper, I can remember it even now, is 1991. It was Paris, actually at the start of the first Gulf War. And I actually brought a complete product, something called Digi4, which was at that point probably one of the first 4-channel digital tape recorders available. And even then I wasn't sure it was enough. You know, when I got there, I found that it was more than enough. And in looking back, I realized I had work that was good enough that I'd done shortly after my PhD and things like that in 1982 that would have been good enough. I'm hoping that this will help you to do things a little bit faster. What took me so long? I mean, when you work out the timing of that, it's about 9 years. So there are several reasons. One was I didn't think my work was good enough, and if I can get any message across to you, if you are working actively in audio and, you know, developing new things, your work is good enough. The other thing I thought I had to do was to present something that was complete. That's not the case for conventions. There is a place for presenting complete work, but conventions and conferences are there for presenting work in progress. So it doesn't matter if it's not complete. I didn't think it was earth-shaking, and I had such a warped idea of what was earth-shaking. Again, it doesn't have to be earth-shaking. We make progress by people learning about little steps, and other people take your little step and take another little step. For example, Blackbird Studio C, which is that iconic and rather odd-looking studio, is the result of lots of people's contributions, and I can see a couple of bits of things that I did over the years in there, and there are bits of George Massenberg's work and other people's work in there, and they were all presented at AES conventions, and you know, it came together to make this amazing acoustic space, and it's a collaborative effort. So that's the other thing. Conferences are about collaborating, and I thought nobody would want to know about my work, and you know, that's the point. I was wrong. Actually, we're really bad at judging the quality of our work. As I've said before, the point of a convention is to meet people, to discuss things, and to present stuff that's work in progress. And that way you learn, we all learn, and we're all better for it. And people want to hear about your work and new work, because at the end of the day, it's actually stimulating. I always went away from conferences with new ideas and sort of, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at things, all sorts of stuff. So people want to hear about new work. So what am I going to cover? It's going to be fairly short. I'm going to cover what is a convention paper, what should be the elements of it, how do you submit one, specifically talking a little bit about the AES process, and I can go into more detail in the questions. I want to try and leave a lot of space for questions. What happens after you've submitted something to a convention? And then I've called it Some Mechanics. It's not a great title, but it's just about how you might go about it. So what is a conference paper? It's a written piece of work, paper, describing work in progress, and I think that's the critical point. It's work in progress, and I was told right at the beginning of my career by a great mentor, it only needs to contain one new piece of work or idea. So if you've discovered a new thing, it might not be a big new thing, it doesn't matter. If you've got something to offer, a little one thing, that's enough for a convention paper. And that's quite important, because I waited until I'd actually built a complete digital tape recorder, which was a lot of work, actually represented about 4 or so years' work to get that all together. I could have actually presented the little stages through, and people would have been interested in how I synchronized things, how I did various bits and pieces, and I didn't know that. So, you know, those bits of work, you might not think they're world-shaking or important, but actually they're probably very useful for somebody else working in the same area. Now, the AES has 3 categories of papers. something called Category 1, which is a complete manuscript. You actually submit a full manuscript of a paper. It's sent out to 2 or 3 people to review, properly peer reviewed. It comes back, usually with lots of queries, questions and markup, and then comes back to you. All right, if you like, that's the top tier paper. I'd suggest that that's probably a big step. If this is going to be your first ever conference paper, Category 1 is, I would suggest, not the one to go for. The next one, which was the one I did when I did my first AES paper back in 1991, was Category 2, the abstract précis reviewed convention paper. That's really nice because it doesn't require a big layout of effort right at the beginning, and it lets you get into the process much more easily. And finally, there's something called the abstract reviewed engineering brief. Now, that is also a useful category. I actually think it's maybe a little bit harder because they have to be compact, and it's a little bit harder to write something really compact first time round. So my opinion is the best category to go for your first paper in the AES is something called the Category 2 paper, and it only requires 3 things from you. It requires a title for the paper. It requires a 500 to 750 word précis, so that's about 1 page of type, and a 60 to 120 word abstract. So it's actually quite a small piece of work to submit. So suppose you do that. How do you go about doing that? Well, I'm going to suggest that the first thing you do is write your précis first. Write your 500 to 750 words about your idea or piece of work. It doesn't have to be, it can be technical, it can be operational. You may have, found a really neat way of solving a particular production problem, that sort of thing. And the best way to get into writing it is not to worry about grammar or structure or anything being in the right words. I always used to say to my students, vomit words onto the page. Don't worry about the grammar or order. Just get those ideas into the computer, onto the page. Don't even worry about the length, and definitely don't worry about trying to get it right first time. It doesn't matter. This is just capturing the ideas. I hesitate to say this, but this is one of the few times you can actually fix it in the mix afterwards. And that's, once you've got your ideas onto the page, then you can check the grammar, move stuff around to get the order right, tighten up your language, etc., as required. That first stage you should do, I think, privately in the comfort of your own home. Once you've done that first revision, then, if possible, it is helpful, but not always possible, let someone else who will be honest with you to read it and come back at you. They'll find a few silly mistakes, and they might have some suggestions that help you do it better and revise again. Once you've got that 500 to 750 word précis, it's fairly easy to abstract from it 120 words to give you a very compact description of that précis, and you should by then have a good idea of what a good title might be. Once you've done that, once you've got those 3 things, then all you need to do is go to the convention submission site and submit those words, and it's just a matter of filling in the boxes with your details, and a quick cut and paste into the appropriate fields that are in the site. So what happens after you've done that? Once it's submitted to the site, it then comes into my orbit for the spring online sessions. We will send it out without your name to 2 anonymous reviewers. It's called, and you won't know who those reviewers are. It's called double blind reviewing, and we're trying to get that right. It's so there's no bias from whether they know or don't know you or anything like that. We try and make sure the reviewers have some expertise in your proposals area, which are selected by the keywords you put in, and the keywords are what you think fits what you do. It doesn't have to fit into any one of the categories on the paper's core. We've set up some possible categories, but they're not prescriptive. They're just some ideas. They're there to help us, not to define what you can submit. What happens then is it goes out to those reviewers whose work we really do appreciate, because they do this all for free and voluntarily. They will then send back to me and my colleague Remy a review, and that review will contain some feedback to you, some private comments to Remy and me, and a numerical evaluation again to Remy and me between plus and minus 3, to give us some idea of what their rating for the paper is. What happens then is, based on that review, we make a decision on whether to accept it or possibly suggest an alternative format. This is one case where, we might get a paper and they say, actually, this is quite an interesting paper, but we think it would be better as an engineering brief, and the reviewer, which case we will actually send it back to you with the suggestion that actually it might work better as an engineering brief. So you get some feedback. Usually it's things like the reviewer for this sort of proposal, that it would be really interesting to hear about this aspect of what you proposed, or could you elaborate a bit on that when you write the full paper. So you get the feedback and the decision sent back to you, and I think that should happen by sometime in April this time, if all goes well. It's been, and let's be positive, your paper gets accepted. So what do you do now? Well, what you then need to do is download a template. We actually provide a Word template. I don't know if we still provide LaTeX templates, but we get certainly a template for the category 2 paper. You could even do that when you submit your proposal, and be working on it in the anticipation of it being accepted. You write your paper, and again, it's actually the same process that you did for your précis. Get ideas onto the page first, don't worry about length or grammar, and then move stuff around until you get it right once you've captured your ideas. And let a friend who will tell you honestly what's good and what's bad, to catch anything, any mistakes and things. You probably need to revise it again after you've done that, and after that you'll submit your paper to the site. As regards the presentation, that's a separate process, because at the moment, instead of walking in and presenting slides, you obviously have to prep a video, and I'll leave that to somebody else. And that, I think, is it. I'm ready for questions. Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you, Jamie. So we have a link in the chat box right now so that you guys can see what is a part of the call for contributions. So it's www.aes.org/events/150/authors/CFC. And so I don't know if anybody is participating in the chat and the Facebook Live group, but we can actually put that in the discussion page on Facebook if you guys need it, and maybe even in the YouTube description, I don't know. But if you go to aes.org, you can navigate your way to the 150th convention. There's also not just the 150th convention, but there's also an education conference coming up as well that you can look at the call for contributions for that. And what you'll find at that page is the template that you can download. Jamie referred to a LaTeX template. There's a Word template, and that's how you format your paper so that it looks like an AES paper for any of you who have been there.
Yes, sorry, sorry, Leslie, I should have made that clearer. There's a Word template, but there may be a LaTeX template for those that use LaTeX. There used to be. I don't know if there is or not.
Yeah, actually, I think I have the page open, and maybe I think I have to sort of dig in there, but
there is a LaTeX page, a template available. So both in Word and in LaTeX, and of course the final presentation you send it in as a PDF. That's just what I wanted to add to that.
Cool, thank you very much. And also, you had mentioned Remy. Who's Remy? Tell us who Remy is. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Jamie or me?
What?
Are you telling it or will I?
You know him better, Bert, actually.
Okay. Jamie is working at the Technical University of Eindhoven. He works in acoustics, room acoustics, and so he is in a kind of academic environment for his daily work. He has his own company as well, shared with another engineer. So yeah, he is part of our scientific members, and I'm happy that he was willing to be one of the paper co-chairs.
So we have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, and let's start with this one from Hannah, who asks, what are the attempts of an academic panel reviewing your application? How to make our application stand out? How to balance between technical and artistic approach in writing the application?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Hannah. I did think about this. I think, right, if we do a category 2 submission, what you have is about 500 to 750 words. So the key there is clarity. So for the précis, initial précis submission, for example, you probably wouldn't put in quotes from artists in the field if you're going to use them, or references or anything like that. It's just describing what you're going to put in the paper. I've always, when I've done this, and I tend to do it most of my submissions as category 2, even now, is I always put a little paragraph right at the end that describes why the paper matters. What problem does it specifically address and solve, and what would be the benefits from it? Now, I happen to be mostly in the acoustics engineering process, so mine would be, this gives us a new tool for controlling absorption and diffusion in a room by blah 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 blah, or something like that. If yours was a new technique, you would obviously say, this technique lets us do this, whatever task it was, much more effectively and integrates better into workflows and so on and so forth. So it's really about making things clear rather than, hitting any particular fantastical bullseye or anything like that. Let me know if that answers your question in the chat.
Our next question from April says, April Tucker, what tips or suggestions would you give to professionals, people working only in the field, not with a school or academic paper?
Okay, right. This is a bee, and Bert may have something to say about this as well. This is a real bee in my bonnet, right? There are two basic sorts of knowledge. There's academic knowledge, book knowledge, explicit knowledge. That's useful, it's helpful, but it's not enough. On the other hand, if you're doing the biz day after day after day, you are learning a different sort of knowledge, which we call tacit knowledge, which can only be learned by experience and passing those experiences on to future generations. So you as a professional, you have that tacit knowledge in spades. You have loads of that stuff, and we need to hear it. So you would write a paper about how you do things, what to watch out for, stuff like that. And that would be, again, of interest to our members. I mean, I've noticed that on the Facebook streams and things, there's lots of tutorials about, using backbus something or others to do various equalization and mixed tasks, and I haven't a clue what they're talking about, I can tell you. On the other hand, I can see what's being presented are techniques that other people would say, oh, I didn't think of using that particular way. That's a really good idea, and that will help my workflow. So, concentrate on what you do operationally that makes your life easier. There's probably something there that would make somebody else's life easier. Would that work for you, Bert?
Yes, definitely. And I think of one of the other things that you said, that you present one new thing that can help us
Yes.
forward.
Yeah.
And so basically, I think that's the key. And it is, yeah, if it's scientific or experienced, it could be anything.
You know, um, even if it's a mic technique that you tried something out in the studio and you've never seen it before anywhere else in the books or anything, but it kind of worked cool. That would be worthwhile talking about. Or even, I mean, the classic one, In the Air Tonight. Nobody noticed the live mic line on the mic on the floor at the back of the room, but it worked. Somebody had to communicate that piece of serendipity. So there's plenty of stuff there.
Let's see, we have a couple other questions that we've sort of answered, but there's a little bit of nuance to each one. I think that, will help add a little bit of clarity. For example, we talked about proofreading, but the wording of this question from Christina is, how important is an editor? So how important is an editor?
Okay. I think for convention things, what you need is a friend to proofread for understandability and language, because we all make mistakes, especially with word processors. They'll sneak in correctly spelled words that mean something completely different from what you were saying, and you can't see it because it's not wrong anymore, but it's the wrong word. That's really proofreading. Actual formal editing, I don't think you need for a conference paper. If you are submitting that work in the future to, say, the AES journal, well, they have an editor who will do, the formal tasks that an editor does, which are a little bit more detailed. The thing about conventions and conferences is you're presenting one new idea, and it's a work in progress. So it's a little bit more informal than a book or, a big paper where everything's got to be absolutely tip top and perfect. And speaking as someone who's actually produced books as well, even with the editor, mistakes still get through. So it's I don't think an editor is essential, but if you've got a friend who will tell you when it's not right, and be honest, that's worth its weight in gold.
We've got another question. I'm sort of like bopping between windows, and I would like to solicit some questions. There's none in the Zoom chat. There's none on the Facebook one. So if you're just watching this and thinking, I want to ask a question, I don't know what I want to ask, just throw one out there, because we've got time, and we're looking for questions. Well, here's one for Jordan. And again, this is one we've sort of answered, but what she says is she's completed her master's in record production at University of West London. While it wasn't earth-shaking, I thought my research for my degree was pretty good. How do I turn it into a presentable academic paper? So we talked about this a little bit before, but maybe we could add a little bit of a twist on this, which is let's see, what would the twist be? How do you go from a research paper for school, for your degree? How do you turn that into a paper presentation? And it's interesting too, maybe we could even talk about who owns that first paper, and whether you can quote yourself, or we can even maybe talk a little bit about self-plagiarizing, like how do you expand from that?
Do you want to go first, Bert? Or would you prefer me to go first?
Sorry, I have to unmute. No, this is specifically your area, I think. So go ahead.
Okay, I go first. Right. Well, one of the things actually I've done over my career is I think you're talking about something you may have done as a project or a dissertation, either at bachelor's or master's level. Let me know if I've got that wrong. Very often you've described a piece of work in that dissertation. And actually, you know, the good news is you've pretty much got the framework of a paper already there because you had to write the dissertation. So what I would suggest is you look through that dissertation and you say, so what are the new things? What's the, you were saying there was something that was kind of cool about whatever you did. So what is it? Is it one thing? Is it two things? If it's two things, that's two possible papers. First identify that new idea, new technique, whatever it is. So that's stage one. And then look at your dissertation and say, okay, which bits that I've already written support that, and make a note of that. And using, if you like, that story arc, write your précis. And you've pretty much already done the hardest bit, which is get the ideas onto the page first. It's a matter of pulling bits out. That's what I certainly found with my students. I would actually use their project work and I'd say, look, submit me machine readable form. I would abstract stuff out and put a proposal for them to write a paper on. And if it was accepted, they'd write the paper, and all being well, they'd come to the AES and present it. If not, I would present it for them. But their name would definitely go on at the front of the paper. And when we talk about ownership of papers and things like that, it's leading into this, it's your idea, you own the paper. Now, I don't tend to reference myself in my own papers, but I've noticed some people do a lot of it. I think if you do it too much, people sort of say, really? Are you the only person working in that field? It seems a bit hinky to me, because usually there's quite a few people doing similar things that you can reference. I don't think for an initial paper from a dissertation I've ever referenced the dissertation. And, you know, in terms of authorship, I had a colleague at one of the institutions I worked at, and he said your student always is the lead author because they've got much further to go than you have, and they did the grunt work. So irrespective of, you know, what happened, the student's the lead author. And I think you know, from my point of view, I'd agree with that.
Cool.
Bert.
Is there anything else you want to follow up with? I see that you're active in the chat there, and this was your question.
It was a recording mixing project. Okay, so well, you said there was something neat about it. I know, looking at I saw the question, obviously without lots of detail, and this is probably not the right place to go into it. You thought something was neat. Well, take that neat bit. You said, okay, this was the outcome, if you like, the new idea. What did I do? You know, you must have written background, other people's work. You know, there will have been a structure that you had to do your project submission to make it happen for being marked by the university. So you've got the material there to make a proposal, a paper, and a presentation. Oh, I was going to say one thing. There isn't time to do it in one session here, but I'm quite happy to do a specific session on how to write a paper at some other time for SoundGirls, because I used to do that with my students, and you know, because there is an approach you can take which sort of seems to work. So, but you've got the biz there. The point is, you've got stuff there that you can pull out and put together as a little proposal for a paper at an AES convention.
I think there was one other person in the chat when we were talking about, as we're sort of getting into this question about how to write a paper. Mary, actually, she's a new co-chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, asked, is there a specific structure or format? Now, we talked about the papers template that you can get from that link that I posted in the chat.
Yeah.
But there's also sort of this thing called introduction, method, results, and discussion.
Yes.
You just want to spend a second talking about, how to lay
Yeah.
out.
Okay. So I would go into this in more detail, I think, if I did a separate paper. But
Right.
I think two things. One is, in a paper, you're trying to tell a story. And when you try and tell a story, there are two things you have to keep in mind. One is, who's your story for? Because you write differently for a child compared to, an adult. I used to say to my students, when you write your reports, the person you're writing for is you before you started that project. I think that's quite a good level to pitch it at. What would you like to have read before you started doing this crazy thing that you did for your project, that would have avoided so much pain and grief while you actually did the project? Okay, so that's who you're writing for. And then you have to ask yourself the question, what's my story? Now, this does depend on what discipline you're in. So if you're in biology, for example, there's a very rigid format. It's previous introduction, previous work, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. Okay, very straightforward order. That's often the case for pure science projects. However, as engineers and audio engineers, doesn't matter whether you're technical or operational here, it's kind of messy. It's much harder to put a prescriptive structure on how you write the paper, but generally there will be some elements. If you think of it as a story, you introduce the characters in the story at the beginning and maybe some back history. So that's your previous work, why you're doing it, why it matters, what you hope to happen, and then you'll have how you went about doing this new idea, whether it's technically or operationally. Describe the new idea, maybe describe, because tension's always a good thing, maybe there were some problems you had to overcome, describing those, and then, all being well, it gets wrapped up into a nice, they live happily ever after type conclusion at the end of it. Or maybe it's not quite so tidy, but there's sort of a conclusion and then some further work that needs to be done, because again, conference papers are a work in progress. So it's quite okay to say, well, this was really interesting and it works really well, except we need to address these couple of extra bits that didn't quite work out so well, the further work. And that's cool, because that's what a conference paper does. It's part of the journey. You're taking a couple of selfies and snapshots of the journey along the way.
I love this question that's in the chat right now from Angie Mickle. How common is it to submit and present the same paper to different organizations' conferences? That's a great question.
It's very common. I'm not gonna name him, but when I was doing my PhD, which was a very long time ago, the guy on the desk next to me said, "Hey, I've got one paper and 3 Rogers." And what he meant was he'd written one paper describing this one idea, and he then actually submitted it to several different conferences, and he had rewritten the paper in inverted commas, but essentially using Roget's thesaurus to use some different words for different papers. So that's quite common. is it moral?
Yeah.
That's actually, I am going to say yes, maybe. All right, because you may describe, when I said about telling a story that fits the audience. So, and I have done this a couple of times. I've done a paper to the AES, which is a particular audience, and I've described things in a particular way. And I've taken the same idea, but I've been actually talking to a completely different sector of people who would never go to an AES conference. The classic case in my case is that the AES is sort of people that develop new things and create new things and stuff like that. But I also talk to people who install audio equipment and professional sound installations like railway stations, etc., etc. So they're a completely different audience. They're not as academic, they're much more focused on getting the job done. So I may talk about the same idea with them, but the way I present it, the way I describe it, is completely different to how I described to the AS. Now, you could argue, well, yeah, but that's the same paper, Jamie. Yes, it is. In some sense, it's the same idea, but I'm communicating it to two different groups.
So sort of like,
And I think that's okay. I mean, because you're not wasting the same group's time by presenting the same thing forwards. I know people, this is in the biology field because I happen to know some biologists, where I know one person got very frustrated because they were looking for a particular thing and they picked up the same authors, the same, in several different years, and they really didn't do anything new between those 4 papers. And this person found it very frustrating because clearly he'd spent time reading the papers to find there was no extra information. Now, that's why I say it's got to contain at least one. It's got to contain one new idea. Compared to some people, that's actually definitely winning, rather than regurgitating the same idea. But it can be a piece of work you did where you got perspective A, and then you did some more work and you suddenly realized there was a completely different perspective B. That's worth writing a different paper about. Or even though it's the same area, you're seeing it from a different direction, you're showing people a different direction. So it's a slightly fuzzy boundary. Obviously the same paper again and again and again, maybe not.
I mean, it's, also there can be a progression to the paper where it goes from a convention to the journal, right? So that you're
Yes,
on and clarifying, once you get feedback from your audience after you.
yes, absolutely. You may it may be the same paper, and I've had papers I've presented at conferences in the AS that have ended up in the journal, and they will have been edited more thoroughly, usually reviewed again. So there'll be more, hey, what about this? Oh, I don't really like that equation, and stuff like that. And I was going to say about the same paper to different organizations in my field. I may present a circuitry type paper to the AES. I may also present that paper to a conference of electrical engineers. Again, different audiences, same idea, but I've written the paper. One will focus on the audio aspects of it. The electrical engineers, I might actually focus much more on the design of the circuit bit. Right, so that's why I was saying it's not an absolute never do that. It's more a case of, I think it's acceptable to, if they are bimodal or multimodal audiences, so you're unlikely to overlap. That's probably okay because you're broadening your communication reach. I don't see a problem with that.
And I was also going to say, since we have a few minutes left and not a lot of questions showing up in the chat or the Facebook group, we haven't talked at all about some of the panels that we see, which are not based in maybe they're not even based in academic research. And one example of that I have is the experiential things that we're doing with, for example, African Americans in audio, women in audio, some of these other topics that we just want to explore. There was one on Japanese acoustic instruments that was a demonstration of the different sounds, and I think this was at AES New York, where there wasn't an accompanying paper. There are lots of things that happen at AES conferences. And so what happens if you want to do a panel or a workshop is there's a whole nother category in the call for contributions that you would sign up and you say, you know what, I want to do a workshop where we talk about radio drama. Like how you make a radio drama where you have actors and live Foley going on. And it wasn't necessarily a paper, but there's people in France and England and America, and they all have all these different approaches to radio drama, and that's a cool thing to talk about. So if you're out there and you're thinking, I don't have my postgraduate degree and I really didn't do any research, but I'm really interested in radio drama or something, just you can do a panel discussion and you submit it just in the same place, and it gets vetted by the planning committee. Maybe Bert Kraaijpoel, do you want to talk about some of the panels and workshops that you've seen that are kind of cool, and some of the things that might happen at our next
Sorry. Well, basically, we only started, so we don't have much to go for at the moment. So I'm really very grateful for you suggesting a few things. I also thought of one of the questions mentioned something about artistic things, and I think we are of course a rather technical organization, so maybe the first focus would be on the technological aspect, but of course it has a large influence on maybe even on the artistic performance, on the way it sounds. So the whole workflow and technology used that leads to a specific result in that area, I think would be very interesting. I'm at the moment supervising a student who is researching on that in history. So what in the audio technology influence specific musical styles, basically in pop music. But I think that it's very difficult to find sources for that. And so, I would encourage to also include the artistic results, really.
Yeah, can I sort of add to that?
Yes.
And we had they just did, the effect of the hand on a microphone for different hand positions. That was in virtual Vienna. Now, the interesting thing about that to me was, they did, what is it called, cupping or something like that, which is a technique very much used by hip hop artists and things. And when I was looking at it acoustically, I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because bing, a light went off. That makes a lot of sense, because your equipment limited actually gives you some EQ that helps you overcome the much more much more bass you have in your room compared to what you would normally have in a more conventional recording environment. And I thought, that's actually quite useful. It was only presented as scientific, but it could have been easily modified and presented as, hey, here's some examples of the way you hold your microphone and what it does to the frequency response, and why that's a good or maybe not a good idea given the musical contexts. And I myself have done research on people singing and why, you sing bel canto if you're doing opera, whether you do belting when you're doing sort of jazz musical type stuff. There's definite reasons behind that technique in terms of getting your voice heard above the instrumentation. And if you like, it's human EQ rather than trying to fix it in the mix EQ. So there's lots of possibilities there.
I'm glad you brought that up, is because I saw another one that talked about people using the in theater who use the wig mics,
Yes.
and they try and get that same, sometimes they're cupping their hand here.
Yeah, I know. but you know, the frequency response of an Omni stuck down there that's peachy coloured or, you know, skin coloured, depending on your is actually pretty good. But you know, then you're giving the sound person a nightmare because they've got how many radio frequencies to deal with, and everything else. I was going to say on PhDs, my first ever paper that I ever did was I wasn't a PhD. In fact, I was working in industry. I'd got a degree as an electrical engineer, but we described. I'd come up with a new idea for speech coding, and we described that. So, you know, just because you don't have a degree doesn't mean you don't have to have or a PhD doesn't mean you can't present papers. I had a colleague at York where I was teaching. He didn't have a PhD, and yet he's now a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. You know, he's got lots of awards. He's done some amazing work because it's not about what degree you've got. It's about what you do. And I think we're an engineering society. It's in, you know, it's written on the tin. It's about what you do, not about what qualifications you've got.
We've got one question in the chat from Christina, who's asking about identifying areas of interest in audio where work needs to be done at this time. And so I just pasted in the chat, if you go to that call for contributions and you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, there's some proposed topics, which are acoustics, applications, which could be anything from forensic audio to Web 2.0, auditory display, mobile and handheld devices, audio music and retrieval, audio content management, audio processing. So there's like tons of topics to look at down there. I think if, you know, we say some of the most exciting areas, I mean, like I'm way into the, you know, what's going on in immersive audio and audio for VR and binaural audio, like that stuff is really cool to me, but you know, everybody has different interests, and you know, I don't, you know, that area is hot, but so is machine learning and all these other things.
Yeah, but to do some sound stuff, tracking performances when you can't be in the same studio together, and where, you know, what and you know, you can't afford to have a full bandwidth leased VPN to your studio. How do you maintain ensemble for, you know, people scattered geographically? I mean, there's a lot of work going on now. I can't think why really, but it's important at the moment because we're not able to do what we normally do with music and get together and play. We're having to innovate, you know, to deal with the situation as it stands. And, you know, there must be new ideas coming out of that are of interest to everybody. You know, and don't think they're only interested for people operationally. I sat in on one of these, you know, how to play synchronized musicians together, and it triggered ideas in my head, you know, about why various effects might happen. So you get stimulation from all sorts of different areas when you're in this sort of field.
For sure. Well, I want to just thank everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to especially thank Jamie for this amazing presentation. And I'm just going to give you guys like sort of a heads up. Maybe we'll end at the top of the hour, but let's get some final words from our participants, starting with Jamie.
Okay. Just want to say I'm really happy to do a specific session on writing a paper where we talk about it in a bit more detail. Just to say that. But thank you for listening.
Yeah, definitely. And then Bert, if people have questions about the upcoming AES 150, is there an email address that they can write to?
If I'm unmuted. Yes, I think that will be chairs at AES 150. I don't know by heart. You might know better.
Yeah, this is Colleen. Sorry, it's 150.
Thank you, Colleen.
150th, so 15T8, if 150TH_chairs at aes.org. I'll also drop it into the chat.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah, Colleen, you do that. I sent mine just to Carrie.
Thank you, Colleen. You saved me. You saved me. Yeah.
And maybe Carrie can put that in the Facebook page, since I did my little Zoom fail. But yeah, thanks again to Carrie. Thanks to SoundGirls, just for being awesome, and for hosting this stuff on the YouTube and Facebook Live. Definitely check out the SoundGirls podcast if you haven't already. There's some great interviews on there. Thanks everybody for joining, and we hope to see you at AES 150. Send us any questions. Of course, you can reach out to me on Facebook, Leslie.Gaston. And last word goes to Jamie. Go for it.
You can do it. Seriously.
Yes, definitely you can. If we can, you can.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. And we'll see you on the other side.